Perfect. Okay, thanks very much for organizing this really nice conference and for inviting me. I'm an associate professor of economics at University College London, and I work on early childhood development and early interventions. And I'm very happy to present some of the research that I'm doing on the consequences of the COVID crisis on parents and children, with particular reference to England. So I started this project writing a piece in the Boxeo of the CPR, Center for Economic and Policy Research, in which I essentially made three key points. First, that the coronavirus crisis is an unprecedented mix of shocks. So it has started as health shock, and then because of the social distancing and lockdown measurement has become an economic shock. And so we can use part of the existing literature and existing shocks to try to understand the consequences, but in truth, this is really an unprecedented mix. So the key point is that these costs are unlikely to be borne equally, because especially more vulnerable parents and children are more likely to be more adversely affected. And so a lot of the research that I'm doing is try to understand what are these costs and how to support best the parents and children during and after the crisis. And as I say, particular reference to England and particular reference to the 0-5 age group. So before doing that, just give me an overview of what, an economic model of child development can help on understanding the possible life course consequences of the COVID crisis. And this is really based on the idea that child development is really a key determinant of well-being during the life course. And it's part of what in economics we call human capital. So if you think a life course economic model, let's think of human capital as this multidimensional concept which starts in early childhood, in fact, in the prenatal period, and which is composed of different dimensions such as child cognitive, socio-emotional, and health development. And so we all know that child development does not develop in a vacuum, but it is improved by positive parental behavior that in economics we call investment, by other caregivers. So things like good nutrition, proper healthcare, stimulation, education. And we do value human capital because it has multiple returns across the life course. It makes us healthier individual, more productive individual, in general it increases well-being. So now a shock which could happen in the early years, such as the coronavirus, for example, could cause, among other virus stressors, increased stress and hardship on the parents. So just to give you one possible pathway through which this could affect child development in human capital over the life course. So parents can have increased stress, they might lose their job, and this could cause reduced time or reduced quality of the time spent with their children, which could have consequences for child human capital, which in the absence of any intervention of a remediation action could have cascading effects throughout the life course. So that's what we want to avoid. So what we can do, so we have different ways of sustaining parents and children, and one of them with particular reference to United Kingdom is health visiting. So health visiting, for those of you who don't know, is a universal program existing, which in United Kingdom and also in the Scandinavian countries, where the health visitor is a key professional. It's like nurse or a midwife with further training in community public health nursing, which is responsible for promoting the health and well-being of children under 5. And funding for health visiting has been increasingly cut. I have a huge project funded by the Level of Trust, where I try to understand the extent of the consequences of these cuts. And this figure on the right, you see what's been happening to health visiting between 2016 and 2019. And you see all the orange brownish shades are all the areas in England for which there have been cuts. So health visiting was already underfunded before the crisis, and during the lockdown, many community health services have been stopped in part or in total, and some practitioners in some areas, up to 50–70%, have been redeployed to the front line. And home visits, where they've been continued, they've been carried out mostly virtually, and they've been mostly prioritized for vulnerable families and carried out face-to-face with proper PPE only in some circumstances where there was extreme need. So I won't present this today, but the results will be out soon. I have an ongoing survey carried out with the Institute of Health Visiting, where we are surveying a big number of health visitors. We have in excess of 500 responses, and we asked them extensively about the impacts of the coronavirus crisis on the health visiting workforce. So stay tuned, there will be results on this soon. An aspect that I would like to focus on in the remaining half of my presentation is what's been happening with nursery and preschool, and in particular what have been like the trade-offs the parents have faced in sending or not the kids to nursery and preschool. So as we know, during the period of the strict lockdown, 23rd of March up to 1st of June, earlier settings were open only to children vulnerable and children of key workers. And this figure here is taken from a report of the DFE, and it shows that approximately 1/3 of the earlier settings have been open. And is the number of children who have attended the earlier settings, and you see that at most they've been like 88,000 children, but still on average they've been less than 80,000. And the DFE report says that 80,000 children attending is 5% of the number of children usually attend. But the key point is that even among those eligible, so the children of key workers, only 7% of them attended, and 9% of the vulnerable children attended. And then you see here on the right, there is an increase after the 1st of June. So the first thing that we did, and this is an ongoing study and presenting some results, is we are surveying a sample of approximately 800 parents. It's an online sample of children less than 5 resident in England. And we are carrying out a few surveys, and the data that I'm gonna present today has been collected around June 1st, which is when the childcare was reopened. And we really wanted to understand whether these parents sent the kids in childcare, and if not, why not, and what they were gonna do going forward. And now we are in the process of interviewing them. In our sample, approximately 1/3 of them are key workers, which is slightly higher than the national prevalence, which is 22%, according to Institute for Fiscal Studies research. So we first asked around the 1st of June whether they sent children in preschool during the lockdown, and majority of them, of course, was not eligible enough for their place. But the important thing is that among those who actually could send their children, only say 1/3 of them send it, which is like this 12% here, and 26% of the overall sample, or 2/3 of those who actually sent their children, they did not send the children to an early year setting. So for this individual here, we asked them, why didn't you send your children to a childcare setting? Why didn't you take up the place? And here I'm presenting the answer which we were given by the key workers. And the first and most cited reason was really a combination of, we had safety concerns about sending our kids to an earlier setting, and we managed to look after our child at home. And it's, you see, these are various answers that we were given. It was really a combination of one or both parents were furloughed, or they could carry out their tasks at home. There was other family member who was able to take care of the children, and there were safety concerns. Another reason which were given was that the nursery was closed. So even if they were eligible or offered a place, there was no, say, reasonably closed nursery, or if there was one, it closed because it could not sustain during the lockdown, which is a pretty common theme, unfortunately, during the coronavirus pandemic. Then we asked them, okay, so are you going to send your child back to nursery and preschool Monday, June 1st? And we literally asked these questions either on the end of May or early on June 1st. And so what we see is that the proportion of those saying yes, the percentage is slightly higher than those who had sent the kids to school before. Many of them say no, some uncertain, and other pretty much gave us another date. They say we're gonna send them later. And as before, the first most cited reason is that there were safety concerns and the children could be looked after at home. Other reasons where we're gonna send the child later, or there are some vulnerabilities in the family which will prevent us from sending our children. We also asked them, among 100 children, like your child, how many do you think they will be sent to nursery preschool in June or in September? And as you see, parents think that other parents are actually more likely to send their children than themselves. Then we asked 2 more questions that I'm going to present the results of. So first one, we want to understand a little bit better what were the perceived risks that the parents had in their children attending nursery preschool. So we asked them, think about 100 children the same age as your child. We're going back to nursery preschool on Monday, June 1st. How many of them do you think will contract the coronavirus with health risks? And then we gave them 4 possible combinations. We asked them to give a number between 0 and 100 as kids who will have health risks only for themselves, only for their families, for neither of them, for both of them. And if I show you like the distribution of responses for these 4 questions that we asked, you see just by eyeballing that there is less mass on the right for the 2 graphs that I have on the right, which involves some health risk for the child. And there is a little bit more mass on the 2 graphs on the left, which involves for the family. So more people think that the health risks are not only or not as much for the child, but the child as spreader for a family member. If I show you just the average number of children that the parents reported to think they will contract the coronavirus and be at risk for each of these 4 options, you see, as we showed before, that the smaller average is the one where the respondents say the risk is only for the child and not for the family. And then the 2 higher ones are on average 32 out of 100 children will contract and have no risk for themselves and their family. 31 out of 100 will have a risk for the family, but not for themselves. So again, this kind of give an idea that really there is not only worry about the child for herself, but also a spreader of coronavirus. So this is the perceived risk of attending an earlier setting. What about perceived risk of not attending? And that, of course, involves concerns about the child development. So we ask, the corresponding question, think again about 100 children of the same age as your child who are not going to preschool on 1st of June. How many of them do you think will fall behind their peers if they go back in? And then we give 2 options, July, September, and we give combination of these 2 options with their parents playing with them or bringing them to the playground frequently or rarely. And I'm going to show you first the distribution, just as I did for the previous one. And you see that the 2 on the right are when the kids play frequently with their parents, and then the above go back to the earlier setting in July, below in September, corresponding for the left where the children play rarely with the parents. And then just eyeballing, you see that there is more mass on the right part of the distribution, so greater proportion of parents giving high number of children out of 100 with who can fall behind their peers if parents play rarely with the children, with some difference between sending to earlier setting in July versus September. When the parents, when we give them the scenario, parents playing frequently with the children, there is lower proportion of parents saying high number of children will fall behind. If I show you the mean of the distribution for these 4 scenarios, then you see exactly what you see in the graph, that the greater number of children at risk of falling behind out of 100, so on average 41 out of 100 children, parents think at risk of falling behind if they're sent to their setting back in September, but parents spend little time with their children. The smaller one, if they're back, of course, in July, parents play frequently with their children as we expect. But we see that when parents play frequently with the children, when we compare the red and the yellow bar, the difference is much smaller. So parents think that they kind of make up the time and the activities in earlier setting by spending more time themselves with their children, which kind of give us some insights about how parents perceive this trade-off and make these choices. So as I say, this is part of an ongoing survey, and now we are pretty much returning to the parents and asking them what they've done in this period and what are their perceptions about September. So as I say, I presented some of my work on the coronavirus effects on parents and children, which involves a series of aspects, effects of the early years workforce, in particular the health visitors, effects on parents and children, and some ongoing work using larger data which has been collected in the hope of understanding how children and parents have been affected and how better we can support them. And thank you very much for the invitation again.